I want to start by saying I have worked in that diner for 19 years. 19 years. I've cooked eggs for miners coming off triple shifts. I've made coffee for refugees who hadn't slept in 4 days. I've seen things in that diner, arguments, proposals. A man cry so hard his whole body shook because his daughter called from the inner systems to say she was okay. I've seen a lot. But I have never, not once in 19 years, seen anything like what happened on that Thursday. It started ordinary. I want to make that very clear because people keep asking me if I knew something was off from the beginning, and the answer is no. It started like every other morning. Cold outside, station Varieties runs cold in the early hours. Something to do with the thermal regulators in Sector B they keep saying they're going to fix. The windows had that fog on the inside where you could write your name if you wanted to. The coffee machine was doing that thing where it rattled before it dispensed. I kept meaning to fix that too. Dilara was working the floor. That's important, remember that name, Dilara Voss. She came in at 6, same as always. Tied her hair back in that particular way she had, not neat, not messy, just fast, like she had somewhere more important to be, and this was what she did in between. She had this apron she always wore, the green one with the pocket that had a small tear in the corner she'd stitched closed with red thread because she didn't have green. Little things like that. You notice when you work with someone long enough. She wasn't remarkable. I don't mean that unkindly. I mean she was the kind of person who didn't announce herself. She moved through the diner like she belonged to it, filling mugs before people held them up, knowing that the old miner in booth 3 took no sugar, knowing that the kid from the supply depot wanted his toast dark, almost burnt. She just knew things, about people, about what they needed. She'd been with us for, I had to think about this later when everyone was asking, 8 months. 8 months and I still didn't know much about her, where she came from, whether she had family. She didn't talk about herself, not in a cold way, just in a quiet way, like she was used to keeping the volume of herself turned low. I remember thinking once that she looked tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. Anyway, that Thursday. The door opened at 9:14. I know the exact time because the clock on the grill hood had just clicked over. I can see it from the pass-through window. The door opened, and the cold came in with them, that particular sharp cold that bites the back of your throat, and I looked up because I always look up when the door opens. Habit. There were 2 of them. The man came in first. I don't know how to describe him in a way that does it justice. I've tried. In the deposition I gave to the bureau, I tried for 40 minutes and the agent taking notes finally stopped writing and just looked at me and said, "We understand." Because I think everyone who saw him had the same problem. He didn't look dangerous exactly. Or not only dangerous. He was tall, very tall, with this stillness about him that wasn't normal stillness. Human stillness is accidental. You stand still because you're thinking about something else. His stillness was deliberate. Every inch of him was chosen. Like he'd decided exactly how much space he was allowed to take up in a room, and he was holding to that decision with everything he had. He was pale in a way that said he hadn't seen sunlight in a long time, maybe ever. Dark coat, well made. No insignia. Nothing that would tell you what he was. His eyes, I saw them when he turned toward the counter, were a very dark gray. Not black, gray, like storm water. He was carrying a child. She was small. Smaller than you'd expect somehow, like she hadn't quite gotten around to being the size she was supposed to be. Maybe 18 months old, maybe a little more. Wrapped in something dark and soft, tucked against his chest with her face half buried in the lapel of his coat. She had fine, pale hair that had come loose from wherever it had been pinned and was floating a little in the static warm air of the diner. Her eyes, they were open, watching everything, were the same gray as his. Exactly the same. He stood at the entrance for a moment. Just stood there. I watched him look around the diner, not nervous, not uncertain. He looked the way someone looks when they're checking exits, methodical, efficient, calm. He looked at the other customers. He looked at the windows. He looked at the counter. And then his eyes went to Delara, who was coming around from booth 4 with a coffee pot, and something happened to his face. I can't tell you what it was exactly. It wasn't recognition. Or it wasn't only recognition. It was more complicated than that. Something passed through that very controlled face like a frequency. Like something had briefly interrupted whatever signal he was running on. He chose a booth in the corner. Back wall, sight lines to both doors. He sat down and he set the child on the seat across from him, and he kept one hand on her, not gripping, just present like a tether. The child looked around the diner. She had this way of looking. I noticed it through the pass-through. Most toddlers look at things in pieces. They're interested in bright objects, movement, sound. She looked at things like she was filing them, cataloging. She looked at the salt shaker. She looked at the crack in the vinyl of the seat. She looked at the old Caridian map someone had tacked to the wall years ago and never taken down. She looked at all of it with those gray eyes, and she was completely, utterly silent. I'd never seen a child that quiet. Delara went to their table. Document Segment 2. Primary Witness Deposition. Delara Voss, human female, age 31. Occupation: waitress, Hallows Crossing Diner at time of incident. Deposition recorded 14 months post-incident. Note from Bureau Archivist. Ms. Voss requested her full name be used. She was emphatic about this. I want to be honest with you about what I thought when I first saw them. I thought rich, private transport probably, passing through, not stopping, the kind of people who end up in a place like the crossing because something went wrong with their itinerary, not because they meant to be there. I wasn't wrong about that exactly. I was wrong about almost everything else. I went over with the menu, standard approach, nothing special. I said good morning. I put the menus down. I looked at the man, and I looked at the little girl across from him, and I said, with the particular voice you use for small children in diners, "And what can I get for the little one?" The man looked at me. He didn't answer right away. He looked at me for a moment in a way that I can only describe as careful, like he was deciding something. And then he said very quietly, "She doesn't eat, not in the conventional sense." He paused. "Coffee would be appreciated. Black." I wrote it down. Coffee. Black. I was about to ask if the child wanted juice, water, anything, because even if she wasn't hungry, I had a policy about making sure kids had something in front of them. It made them feel included. It gave them something to do with their hands, and then the little girl looked at me. She'd been watching me since I walked over. I'd noticed that peripherally. But now she turned her full attention to me, and I felt it, which is strange to say about a toddler, but it's the truth. She had these gray eyes, not a baby gray, not the uncertain gray that newborns have before their color settles. These were deliberate eyes, ancient-looking almost in this tiny face. She looked at me for what felt like a long time, but was probably 3 seconds. And then she reached out her hand, this tiny hand, these tiny perfect fingers, and she pointed at me. Just pointed. And the man across the table went completely still. I mean that literally. He had been breathing before. He wasn't breathing now. His hand, which had been resting open on the table, closed slowly into something that wasn't quite a fist. He was watching the child with an expression I'd never seen on an adult face before. It was hope so enormous it had turned into fear. Because sometimes things you've wanted for so long, when they start happening, they scare you first. I thought the child was just pointing. Babies point. It's a developmental thing. I'd read about it once somewhere. It means they're trying to communicate before they have the words. I thought she was just doing that. And then she spoke. She said it very quietly, so quietly I almost missed it. The old miner in booth 3 was coughing. The coffee machine was doing its rattle. But in that particular way that certain sounds have of cutting through other sounds, I heard it. She said, "Mama." And then, as if she hadn't just stopped the world from rotating, she lowered her hand and looked back at the salt shaker. Document Segment 3. Secondary witness deposition. Yannick Hess, human male, age 62. Occupation: retired or surveyor, regular customer, Hallows Crossing Diner. Deposition recorded 14 months post-incident. I was in booth 3. I had my coffee. Delara always brought it without me asking. She knew. And I was reading the sector news on my tablet and minding my own business, which I'm generally good at. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. The diner's not that big. Sound carries. I heard the child say it. I looked up because, well, you do. A child speaking for the first time is a sound you recognize even if you don't know why. There's something in it. Something that cuts through. I saw Delara standing there with her order pad, and I saw her face change. Now Delara Voss has a good face for a waitress, and I mean that as a compliment. She keeps it neutral, professional, warm but not overwarm. In 8 months of watching her work, I'd seen her deal with rude customers, with confused customers, with a man who wept at the counter for 20 minutes about his pension, and she handled all of it with this measured, calm quality. When the child said that word and pointed at her, Delara's face did something I'd never seen it do. It collapsed. Not dramatically, not like crying, not immediately. It was more like something structural gave way. Like a wall that had been holding for a long time had one brick taken out of it and the whole thing had to recalibrate. She put her hand on the back of the booth. For support, I think. She looked at the child. She looked at the man. The man was looking at Delara like he was seeing a ghost. No, not a ghost. A ghost is something that shouldn't be there. He was looking at her like she was something that was supposed to be gone forever and wasn't, and he didn't know yet if that was the best thing that had ever happened or the beginning of something he wasn't prepared for. He said her name. I couldn't hear it clearly, but I saw his lips move, and whatever he said, it made Delara grip the back of that booth harder. I thought I should look away. I didn't look away. Document Segment 4. Primary witness deposition. Delara Voss continued. He said my name. My real name. Not Delara Voss. The name I'd been using for 8 months. The name on my forged work permit and my diner tag and my rental agreement for the room above the supply depot. Not that name. The name I'd had before. The name I'd left behind with everything else. And I need to tell you some things here for this to make sense. Because the Bureau asked me to give a full account and I agreed to that, so I'm going to try. 3 years before that Thursday morning, I was someone different. I was Vale Sorend. For those of you reading this who don't know that name, and there will be many of you because I was very careful for a very long time, I was one of 3 senior court physicians at the Vale throne, the Vampire King's court. His name is Dravith Kale, the man in the diner, the man with the gray coat and the gray eyes and the child. That's who he is. The Vampire King of the Vale Dominion, which spans 11 settled systems and holds sovereignty over approximately 40% of the Outer Rim territories. And I had been his court physician for 6 years before I ran. I can't tell you everything about why I ran. Some of it is not mine to tell. Some of it belongs to him. But I can tell you the shape of it, the general shape, without the private details. 6 years at that court, and I had come to understand that I was not a person there. I was a function. A vital one. Court physicians to vampire royalty are rare. The biochemical knowledge required, the capacity to treat conditions that exist in no standard medical manual, the discretion required, it's a short list. I was valued in the way that an exceptional tool is valued. Precisely. Coldly. Without any of the things that make valuation feel like something other than use. And I had become someone I didn't recognize. Careful, compressed, small, keeping the volume of herself turned down. I left one morning when the king was away from the court on diplomatic business. I took nothing. I became Delara Voss. I found my way to the furthest reach of the Outer Rim that I could afford passage to, and I became a waitress, and I made sure that every day I looked like a person who had never been anywhere important. I didn't know about the child. I want to be absolutely clear about that. I left before she was born, before she was conceived even as far as I knew. Whatever happened, whatever sequence of events led to that child existing, I was not there for any of it. I knew nothing about her. And then there she was, across a diner booth from me, pointing at me with those gray eyes and saying the only word she'd ever said. Mama. Document Segment 5. Reconstructed surveillance feed transcript. Hallows Crossing Diner, Station Varieties, Camera Array 4C corner coverage. Timestamp 09/14/07/09/3144. 09/14/07. Subject A, male, tall, pale, dark coat, enters with Subject B, female, child, approximately 18 months. Proceeds to booth 7C, sits. Places child on opposing bench. Maintains physical contact, left hand on child's arm. 09/14/52. Subject C, female, brown hair, green apron, approaches booth 7C with menus. 09/15/18. Exchange of words. Subject C appears to gesture towards Subject B, child. Subject A responds. Subject C writes in order pad. 09/15/41. Subject B, child, orients fully toward Subject C, extends right arm. Points. 09/15/44. Subject B vocalizes. Audio analysis. Single vocalization, 2 syllables. Matched to 94.7% confidence. Mama. 09/15/45. Subject A, hand closes. Breathing suspended, confirmed via thermal differential scan. Gaze fixes on Subject C. 09/15/47. Subject A vocalizes. Audio analysis, single word. Matched to 89.3% confidence. Name, cross-referenced with court records. Match, Vale. Note, this segment flagged for automatic escalation to bureau monitoring per standing protocol on royal court subjects. 09/15/49. Subject C, grips booth back support with right hand. Observable physical stress response. Remains in position. 09/15/52. 09/22/17. Extended conversation. Multiple exchanges. Audio clarity compromised by ambient diner noise. Fragments recovered. Not possible. 3 years she chose. I didn't know. I know. Subject C remains standing throughout. Subject A remains seated. 09/22/18. Subject B, child, reaches across table. Makes contact with Subject C's right hand. 09/22/19. Subject C sits down. In booth. Across from Subject A, order pad on table. 09/22/20. End of recorded segment. No further notable physical events. Subjects remain in booth. Child remains in contact with Subject C's hand. Document Segment 6. Primary Witness Deposition. Marlowe Fitch continued. I watched all of it through the pass-through. I'm not proud of that, but I'm not going to lie about it either. You watch. When something like that is happening 10 feet away from you, you watch. I saw Delara's face when she heard that word. I saw her put her hand on the booth. I saw the man say something, I couldn't hear what, and I saw Delara's whole body change, like whatever had been holding her upright on a purely technical basis had just been asked to do something harder. I had a moment where I thought I should go out there. Step in. Delara had never told me anything about herself, but she'd worked for me for 8 months, and if this man was, if there was something wrong. I took one step toward the pass-through door, and then I saw something that made me stop. The child reached out. She reached across the table, little arm, such a small arm, and she took Delara's hand. She didn't grab it. She didn't grip it. She just put her hand on top of Delara's hand, very carefully, the way you'd put something fragile down on a surface you weren't sure of. And Delara sat down. She sat down in the booth across from the man, and she looked at the child, and I could see that she was crying. Not loudly. Delara didn't do anything loudly. She was crying the way people cry when they've been not crying for a very long time, and something small finally gets past the defenses. The child was still holding her hand. I went back to the grill. I made the coffee. I brought it out myself, which I never do. I'm the cook. That's not my job. I brought the coffee out and I set it on the table, and I said to the man, because I didn't know what else to say, I said, "You need anything else, you just let me know." He looked at me. He said, "Thank you." 2 words, that's it. But the way he said them, I don't know. I've thought about it a lot in the 14 months since. He said it like he meant every layer of it, not just the coffee, something larger than the coffee. I went back to the grill. They stayed for 2 hours and 40 minutes. I was asked by the Bureau to provide context regarding the developmental significance of the child's first vocalization and its apparent intentionality. Specifically, whether the word mama, directed at a non-parent, could be considered meaningful or coincidental in a child of Dravith-Soren heritage. I want to address the question of heritage first, because it matters. The Vampire King, Dravith Kale, is a pure-blooded Vale-born vampire 7th generation, which is significant. 7th generation Vale-born vampire lineages carry specific cognitive traits that are well documented in the literature, though studying them is difficult for obvious political reasons. One of those traits is a phenomenon we call first-word anchoring. In standard human development, a child's first word is typically a word they have heard frequently and associate with strong positive emotional experience. Mama, dada. These words appear first because they are acoustically simple and because they are reinforced repeatedly by caregivers. The child doesn't choose the word in any meaningful sense. It emerges from pattern and frequency. 7th generation Vale-born children do not develop this way. What the literature, and I am referencing the Kale-Morath developmental studies here, which are sealed but which the Bureau has authorized me to cite. What the literature documents is that in children of advanced vampire lineage, the first vocalization is not a learned pattern. It is what the researchers called a resonance identification. The child's developing neural architecture, which includes biological components we do not fully understand, is capable of a primitive form of emotional frequency matching. In simple terms, they feel someone before they can say anything. They sense the emotional signature of people around them. And the first word they say is directed at the person, whose emotional signature creates the strongest resonance with their own. Not the loudest presence, not the most frequent, the most resonant. The word mama in this context is not the child recognizing a biological parent. The Vale-born concept of mavel, which mama in standard translates most closely to, does not mean birth parent. It means, roughly, the one who holds the frequency I came from. In the developmental literature, it is understood as the child's first identification of their primary emotional attachment. The child had not met Delara Voss before that morning, and yet she identified her immediately. I will leave the implications of that to the readers of this document. He told me about her over coffee. I say he told me, but it was more complicated than that. Dravith doesn't talk the way most people talk. He talks in the spaces between things. He says something and then he's quiet, and the quiet is supposed to carry the rest. I used to find that frustrating the 6 years I was at court. That morning in the diner, for some reason, it didn't frustrate me. Maybe because I was too busy trying to keep breathing. He told me that her name was Sale, his daughter, Sale Kale. He told me that she had been born 13 months after I left, that she had come early, ahead of all the projections, as if she'd made a decision and was not interested in waiting. He told me that she had not spoken, not a single word, in all the months since she'd been old enough to begin. The court physicians, the new ones, my replacements, had assessed and monitored and reassured. She was healthy. She was developing normally in every measurable way. She simply wasn't speaking. I could see this in his face, the face that I had spent 6 years learning to read because reading it correctly was sometimes the difference between a good day and a very bad one. He'd been afraid. Not of what she was, of what her silence might mean, whether she was unhappy, whether something was wrong in a way that didn't show in scans or assessments. He'd been taking her, he said, to places, traveling, outer rim settlements, inner system stations, mid-territory trading posts, bringing her among people, watching what she responded to, looking for something that made her eyes change, not just the watchful cataloging I'd already noticed, but something brighter, something engaged. Nothing had worked. Until this Thursday morning, when something in his calculation had brought him to Station Varades, a refueling stop, nothing more, and she had walked into Hallow's Crossing Diner and pointed at a waitress and said the only word she apparently possessed. He told me this quietly. The child, Sale, sat between us on my side of the booth. She had climbed over when I sat down, with this determined small body competence that very young children have, and she had installed herself against my side with the absolute confidence of someone who has decided this is where they belong. She was looking at the Caridian map on the wall. Her hand was still in mine. I said, "Why are you telling me this?" He looked at me for a moment. He said, "Because you deserve to know what she did." I said, "And what is it you want from me?" Long pause. He said, "Nothing. I don't want anything from you, Vale. I came here to refuel. She chose the diner." He looked at Sale. "She chooses most things, actually. She's very clear about what she wants." Something about the way he said that, the warmth in it, buried under all that controlled stillness, this real thing trying to get through, something about that made my chest hurt. I said, "She's never spoken before." He said, "No." I said, "And she said?" He said, "Yes." We were quiet for a while. The diner made its morning sounds around us. Marlowe's grill, the coffee machine rattling, someone in a back booth laughing at something on their tablet. I looked down at Sale. She had stopped looking at the map. She was looking up at me now, those gray eyes, completely his eyes, with an expression that was too complex for a child her age. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe I just didn't know enough about children her age to know what was complex and what wasn't. I said, "Hello." She said, "Mama." And then she went back to looking at the map. Subject, Dravith Kale. 7th generation Vale-born vampire. King of the Vale Dominion since year 412 of the Outer Rim calendar, which is to say, for approximately 240 standard years by current reckoning. Age by most reliable estimates, late 500s, though Vale-born aging does not map cleanly to standard timelines. Physical description, as given in multiple witness depositions, cross-referenced. Tall, approximately 64. Pale, consistent with Vale-born physiology and minimal solar exposure. Dark gray eyes. Hair, dark, typically worn simply. No distinguishing marks visible in public access surveillance. Political standing. Controversial. The Vale Dominion's governance is regarded with varying degrees of apprehension across the galactic settled territories. The king's policies are considered by some analysis bodies to be unusually measured for a vampire sovereignty, slower to aggression than historical precedent would predict, more inclined to diplomatic resolution than military assertion. This has been attributed variously to cunning strategy, genuine temperament, or the influence of his unusual choice of advisors over the years, which has included several non-vampire species in senior positions. Personal status at time of incident. The child Sale Kale was born 13 months prior to the diner incident. The Bureau has no record of a birth parent on the mother's side, no court announcement, no genetic registry filing, no standard documentation. This is unusual even for Vale sovereignty, where personal matters are handled with discretion. The child's biological origin remains undisclosed by the king's court, and was not addressed in this archive. Travel record at time of incident. The king and the child Sale traveled under assumed identities on a mid-range passenger transport, routed through 6 separate relay stations to obscure the departure point. This is consistent with private, unannounced travel. The route eventually terminated at station varieties for refueling. Note from Bureau Archivist. In the interest of completeness, this archive acknowledges that what brought the Vampire King to a diner on station varieties on a Thursday morning was, by his own later statement to Bureau liaisons, intuition. His daughter had been pointing toward the diner's direction, insofar as direction is meaningful aboard a space station, for approximately 40 minutes before they arrived. He had followed where she pointed. He had been doing that, he said, for 6 weeks. 2 hours and 40 minutes. That's how long we sat in that booth. I should have been working. Marlowe never came out to say anything. I found out later he'd refilled the coffee himself twice and told the other customers Delara was on a break. He'd never given me a break in the middle of a Thursday morning rush in the 8 months I'd been there. I owe him a debt I don't know how to pay back. We talked. Not about the big things mostly, or not directly. We talked around the edges of the big things, that's how Draveth works. He builds toward things sideways. He'd ask something that seemed tangential and I'd answer and realize, 3 answers later, that he'd been asking about something else entirely. He asked about the diner. How I'd found it. He asked about station varieties, what the settlement was like. He asked about Marlowe, who he'd apparently assessed in the 30 seconds before choosing the booth. He asked what I did with my evenings. I asked him what he was really asking. He was quiet for a moment, and then without looking at me he said, "Whether you're well." I didn't know what to say to that. In 6 years at his court, no one had ever asked me that. Not in a way that meant it. Not in a way that was looking for a real answer rather than a status report. I said, "Some days." He nodded, like that was a complete answer, like he knew exactly what some days meant. Sale had fallen asleep against me sometime in the 2nd hour. She just tipped over, incremental and inevitable like a planet finding its orbit, and she was asleep with her cheek on my arm and her hand still loosely around 2 of my fingers. She slept with absolute stillness. No fidgeting, no sound, just there. I looked at her. I'm trying to be honest in this account, and so I have to be honest about this. I didn't understand what I felt. I still don't, entirely. She was a stranger's child. She was the child of the man I had spent 6 years working for and then run away from. She had said a word to me that I had no right to, no biological, no historical, no logical right to. And she was asleep on my arm, and she felt like something that had been missing, and I hadn't known it was missing until it arrived. I don't know what to do with that. I'm still working on what to do with that. I come into the crossing every Thursday for breakfast. It's a thing. Has been for 3 years. I get the eggs, I get a coffee, I sit in booth 2 by the window, and I read or I don't read, depending on what kind of week it's been. I saw them come in. You could not see him, the man. He had that quality, not loud, just present in a way that changed the room's atmosphere a little, like barometric pressure dropping before weather. I watched what happened at the booth because I was in a sight line and I'm nosy. I'll own it. I saw the child point. I saw Delara's face. And I want to add something to this record that I haven't seen mentioned in the other accounts I've read, because I think it matters. After Delara sat down in the booth, after she'd been sitting there for a while, I watched the other people in the diner. The old miner in booth 3 stopped pretending to read his tablet and was just openly watching, with this expression on his face like he was trying to remember something. The 2 supply workers in the front booth had stopped talking and were watching too. Marlowe, I could see him through the pass-through, had stopped moving around the grill and was just standing there with a spatula in his hand. Nobody said anything. Nobody went over. Nobody interfered or interrupted. We just watched, all of us in this diner, watching this woman and this man and this sleeping child in a corner booth. Like we'd all been gathered there for this particular morning, for a reason we didn't know yet. I'm not a person who believes in that kind of thing, usually. Fate, or destiny, or whatever word you want to use for the idea that things happen in a pattern. But that morning in that diner, I believed in it. Just for those 2 hours. Note, this is the only formal deposition the king agreed to give. It was conducted in one session, lasting 90 minutes. He requested that the full transcript be included in this archive without redaction. I will tell you what I came to the diner to do. I came to refuel. That is the honest answer. I had no plan beyond Sale's pointing. She had been pointing in various directions for 6 weeks, and I had been following because it was the most alive I had seen her. She had intention in those moments, direction, something that looked like anticipation. So I followed. It seemed like the least I could do. When she pointed toward the diner's direction, I took her inside because she had pulled at my coat in the way she had. By then, learned made me move. I want to tell you what I was feeling when I walked in. I am not accustomed to being asked what I am feeling. I am accustomed to being asked what I am deciding, what I am planning, what I intend. This is different. I was exhausted. I say that knowing the weight of that admission from someone in my position. I had been king for a long time. I had managed court and policy and alliance and threat, and the 1,000 daily complexities of ruling territories that span 11 systems. I had done this for longer than most people reading this document have been alive, and I was used to that. That exhaustion was the ordinary kind, the kind that is just the background of a life like mine. But Sale's silence, that was a different kind of exhaustion. I am her father. There are many things I can do in that capacity and many things I cannot. I cannot reach into her and find the frequency she's searching for and bring it to her. I tried in the months before that Thursday. I tried everything I knew. I brought people to the court whose voices were warm, whose energy was calm, whose presence was generous. I watched her in those encounters. Nothing reached her. She looked. She catalogued. She was present and distant at once, the way she had always been, and I would tell myself that this was normal, this was fine. The physician said she was healthy, and then I would catch her eyes sometimes in the evenings and I would see something in there that was waiting, looking for something. And I couldn't give it to her and I did not know what it was. Walking into that diner, I was carrying all of that. And then I saw Vale Sorend refilling coffee at the far end of the counter. I want to be precise about what I felt in that moment, because I am trying to be honest in this account. What I felt was not triumph, not anger, not the satisfaction of finding someone who had left without notice after 6 years of good service, none of those things. What I felt was something simpler and harder to categorize. I felt for a moment as though the geometry of the room had corrected itself. Like something had been at a wrong angle for 3 years and had now shifted into place. I chose the corner booth. I sat down. I watched Sale as I always watched Sale for any sign of what she might need or want. I watched her look around the diner in her particular way. And then Vale walked toward us with the menus. And Sale turned to her. And I watched my daughter look at a person the way I had never seen her look at anything before, not cataloging, not surveying, recognizing. She pointed. And she spoke. I had been waiting for that word for 13 months. I won't describe the extent to which I had been waiting for it. It is not appropriate to this document, but I had been waiting. When she said it and pointed at Vale, I felt 2 things simultaneously. The first was a joy so complete it was almost incapacitating. My daughter had spoken. My daughter was present. She had found the frequency she was looking for. The second thing I felt was more complicated, because she had pointed at Vale Sorend. and I had to consider what that meant. He stayed. After Sale woke up, she woke the same way she slept, absolutely still and then simply awake, gray eyes open and focused. After she woke up, he paid for the coffee and he helped Sale down from the booth, and I thought that was it. That was the morning. I would watch them leave and I would go back to refilling mugs and the world would continue. He stood at the edge of the booth and he asked me, very quietly, if I would walk with them, just to the station corridor, just for a minute. I don't know why I said yes. I told Marlowe I was taking 5 minutes and he looked at me with an expression that said he knew perfectly well it wasn't 5 minutes and it was fine. We walked out into the station corridor. It was mid-morning by then, the busy part, supply workers and travelers and the various people who populated Varieties' commercial level going about their routines. Sale walked between us, holding my hand on one side and his on the other. She had simply taken my hand again when we stood up, with that same absolute confidence that this was where the hand went. We walked. He didn't say anything for a while. Sale looked at everything. A maintenance drone floating past, a holographic departure sign blinking in the corridor, a man walking a very large gray dog that had no business being on a space station and was there regardless. Then Draveth said, "I'm not asking you to come back." I said, "I know." He said, "I'm not asking you to do anything." I said, "Then what are you doing?" He looked down at Sale for a moment. She had stopped walking to look at the dog. The dog looked back at her with the ancient, patient dignity of large dogs everywhere. He said, "I'm telling her where you are, so that she can find you again, if she wants to." I looked at him. I said, "And if I'm not here, I might not always be here." He said, "Then she'll find you wherever you are. I'll follow where she points. Pause. I always will." Sale had apparently reached her conclusions about the dog. She tugged at both our hands, and we started walking again. I said, "You came here following a baby pointing." He said, "Yes." I said, "For 6 weeks." He said, "Yes." I said, I couldn't find the right word, not reckless, not foolish, something adjacent to both that was also somehow the opposite. "That's extraordinary," I finally said. He didn't respond to that, but something in the line of his jaw changed slightly, which for him counted as agreement. My office received an alert at approximately 09:16 on the Thursday in question, an automated flag from the diner's surveillance AI, which had cross-referenced a passenger with court records and escalated to our security protocol. I pulled the feed. I saw who it was. I want to be very clear that I made a decision in that moment that I stand behind entirely, and which I would make again. I did nothing. I didn't send officers. I didn't approach the diner. I didn't contact the court or the bureau or any of the various authorities who would have, under different circumstances, wanted to know that the vampire king of the Vale Dominion was sitting in a diner on my station having coffee. I watched the feed. I watched that child asleep on the waitress's arm. And I thought, some things are above security protocol. My second-in-command asked me later what I was going to put in the incident report. I told him I was going to write that we had received an automated alert and investigated and determined it did not require intervention. He asked what the determination was based on. I told him the situation was being handled. He looked at the feed. He said, "Yeah, okay."